In this video I'm going to talk about the decorative artistic features of the Parthenon as opposed to the architectural structure. So just a bit of an overview of the sculptures of the Parthenon. The entire project of the art and decoration of the Parthenon was directed and supervised by Phidias, who was a friend of Pericles, the leader of Athens at the time of this in this period. And so in this painting here we can actually see the artist's impression of Phidias giving a tour of the Parthenon as it's under construction, and you can see the interior frieze here as it may have looked. Notice here how it is painted. The sculptures were originally painted, so they wouldn't have just been all white like we are and as we imagine today. There was a huge amount of sculptural work on the Parthenon, and so he couldn't have done everything by himself. We think that the pediments, those triangular space in the roof, would have been designed by an individual, but the METOPES, there are a lot more of them, and so they may well have been put together by a team of designers who then told the sculptors what to do. However, across all the different elements of the sculpture of the Parthenon, looking at the pediments, the exterior frieze, the interior frieze, and the cult statue, there is a lot of cross references, and so there is this unity of theme, of composition, of mood. It all works together as a beautiful whole. So as well as looking at the individual elements, make sure you think about how they work together as a whole and how they relate to the function of the Parthenon, or the functions of the Parthenon. So we'll start off with looking at the pediments. The pediments are that triangular decorative roof space, and these were probably actually the last sculpture done on the Parthenon. So we can date them to about 438 to 431 BC, after the temple was actually dedicated, and this is because the temple has to actually be built and the roof space there before the sculptures can be put in place. And both ends tell stories from Athena's life. It is obviously fitting that they tell stories from Athena's life because she is the goddess to whom this temple is dedicated. However, it would be quite unusual to have both ends dedicated to the same deity. So the eastern end over the front door tells the story of her birth out of Zeus's head, and the western side tells of her victory over Poseidon and how she managed to become the patron goddess after whom Athens is named. And so in the two pediments on either side, there are about 50 sculptures, and they are carved in the round. So if you were to take them down, you would be able to walk 360 degrees around them. You can see the backs, even the backs have been done. So there's incredible attention to detail to these massive sculptures. And as we'll see when we have a bit of a closer look at these sculptures in class, the artist or artists who designed and made these pediments had to be quite clever about how they arrange the scene, because it's not just a square or a rectangular shape that's easy to fill. Instead, they had to figure out how to make this scene work in a triangular space. Next up we have the METOPES. So these would be the square scenes that were located around the exterior Doric frieze of the temple. So all in all there are 92 METOPES, and these would be they're roughly square, they're 1.2 meters high. So they are carved in relief, which means they're carved into the surface of the stone. Some are carved in quite low relief, meaning that they're not very three-dimensional, but others are almost in the round in high relief, and they seem to burst out and hang over the frame, so they can be quite realistic. As we can see in this picture here, how they may have looked, the backgrounds were painted red and the figures would have been coloured with bronze details added on for weaponry and so on. So again, a lot of attention to detail has gone into them. Looking at them stylistically, they were probably the earliest sculpture done on the temple. They're a bit more archaic and old-fashioned compared to the other sculpture in the interior frieze and the pediments. Each side tells a different myth, but it's all related to the theme of civilization conquering barbarians, which fits quite nicely to how the Greeks saw their victory over the Persians, the civilized Greeks conquering the barbaric Persians. So on the north side, we have the Greeks defeating the Trojans in the Trojan War. On the eastern side, we have the gods defeating the uncivilized giants. The south, and we can see an example here, is the Lapiths, who were a mythical Greek tribe defeating the centaurs, these half horse, half men creatures. And on the west, it was the Greeks defeating the female Amazons, who again were seen as very barbaric because they were a tribe of women fighting. So that's a bit of an overview of the METOPES, and we'll look at this in more detail in class. Second to lastly, we'll have a look at the interior frieze. This is the Ionic frieze, which tells a continuous story going all the way around. This was carved between 442 and 438 BC, so sort of while the temple was going on. And it's very unique in the fact that it tells the same story all the way around the frieze. So until now, we've sort of had different scenes on different sides of a frieze. This is one continuous story. It's also quite unique in that it illustrates what we think is what is a procession, but what we think is a religious procession, and we think it is probably the Grand Panathenea, the festival where Athena gets her new dress every 4 years and where everyone comes to Athens for it. So we'll have a look at the exact elements in this procession in class in more detail, but basically it's two sort of queues of people going around the temple to the eastern end. And so as you can see in the photos, we've got some men riding horses, there are also some people walking, and then in the center where they're all converging, there are some people seated who we think may be gods. Stylistically, it's carved in low relief, which means it doesn't stand out from the background stone as much as perhaps the other ones in the METOPES do. The top has been carved more deeply than the bottom, and it's been painted in colour, and so this means that when you are standing down looking up at it, as you would be because it's at the top of the temple on top of the columns, it's easier to make out what that scene is. However, of course, all the paint and the colours have been lost, so we've only got it in white now. Finally, if we move inside, the last important sculptural element is the cult statue. This is not the actual cult statue. This is a copy of it, or a copy of how we think it must have looked, and it is in the Nashville Parthenon in Tennessee. So you can see here there is a man standing beside this cult statue of Athena Parthenos to give you a sense of the massive scale of this sculpture. So the cult statue honours the goddess Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin, for whom this temple is named. She's wearing a helmet and a breastplate. She's also holding there a spear and a shield. She is holding in her hand the winged goddess Nike, or Nike, the goddess of victory, and this very famous statue is carved, is sculpted by Phidias, who you'll remember oversaw the whole program. It is a chryselephantine statue, meaning that it is made out of ivory and gold, and it was 11.5 meters high, so the man there gives us a good sense for how massive it was. Again, we'll go into more detail in class about the decorations and the style and so on of the sculpture, but this is a bit of an overview of the key elements of the sculpture of the Parthenon.